This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 40. Welcome to the 40th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. If you've been enjoying the show, I would love it if you would take a moment and leave a review and a rating on iTunes. It helps the show to move up in rankings, and it also helps more people to find it. And of course, I'd like to say a special thank you for everyone who's already left reviews. I read all of them, and I'm always thrilled to hear from you. And also, if you enjoyed today's episode, please stop by the show notes page and leave a comment. So you'll find all the episodes at fertilityfriday.com/podcast. And I've also recently created the Fertility Friday Facebook group. So you can find me there as well. Just go to fertilityfriday.com/community and you'll be redirected to the group. And tonight I'm joined by Sarah Clark. Sarah is a certified life coach and health coach and the founder of CISA Coaching. She trained at the Institute for Integrative Nutrition in New York, studying more than 100 dietary theories, practical lifestyle management techniques, and innovative coaching methods with some of the world's top health and wellness experts. And she practices a holistic approach to health and wellness, meaning that she looks at how all of the areas of your life are connected. And she also helps her clients to look at how all the different parts of your life affect your health and fertility. She's the author of the book Fabulously Fertile, as well as a Fabulously Fertile cookbook. And today we'll be talking about Sarah's own fertility journey, and we'll talk a little bit more about what fertility coaching is, and also some of the ways that we can boost our fertility naturally. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Sarah.
Great. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks for being here tonight. So I did give you a bit of an introduction, but I'd love to start by giving you an opportunity to talk about how you actually entered into this field of holistic health and wellness and fertility. And also if you wanted to talk a little bit about your own journey through infertility and what that was like for you.
Great. Yeah, so I can maybe talk back sort of the whole fertility journey. Maybe start with that. Yeah, so I sort of always joked back in my 20s that I was having hot flashes. I was in HR at the time when I was interviewing someone. I remember kind of waving my face going, I'm having menopausal hot flashes. Well, it actually turns out that I was. So in my early 20s, my periods were always very sporadic, and at the time I thought that was a good thing because I didn't have to worry about the monthly hassle. And then I started having actually some chronic yeast infections, and then I had acne, which even in my teens I never had acne. All of a sudden acne showed up in my early 20s, which was not fun. And then dandruff, which is never fun as well. And also I had a small weird fungal rash on my chest. And then I headed over to my doctor, and at the age of 28 I was diagnosed with premature ovarian failure. So it's basically the loss of function of the ovaries before the age of 40. And yeah, so I left my OBGYN's office kind of in shock, not really sure what happened. And then she handed me a packet to a fertility clinic close to me, and I sort of headed down that path. And now, looking back at the, as I mentioned, the vaginal discharge and the acne and dandruff, all these sort of things, I didn't quite know at that time that they were related to my infertility. So basically my husband and I decided to go down the donor egg route. Yeah, so we signed up at the fertility clinic, and basically back then I would be paying for someone to go through fertility treatment, and then she in turn would share her eggs with me. So I would pay for her treatment and use, have fertility drugs to just sort of get my body ready for the embryos. So we did that. So basically we got the donor profile came in the mail, and we looked at the profile, and there was actually went back to the paternal and the maternal grandparents. So we were able to kind of look to see, if the profile was closely matching me. I'm 6 foot tall, so it was not the average height of most women. So also, although this donor was 5'9", so it was then, and it's funny because my husband's 5'8", so we always joke about that. And my daughter now, who's 13, she is taller than my husband, so it's kind of funny. So, anyways, we had the profile, and then we decided to it was the first one that came through, and we selected it and went with it, and we got pregnant on the first fresh transfer. So that worked for my daughter Ava, and when I was going through all of this, I didn't even. Like alternative therapies were just not even on my radar. I was actually quite clueless about all of it, and I just followed along. And luckily for me, I had a good outcome with my daughter. And then after that, sort of that type A personality, and wanted to, get things going. I wanted to have a second child, so went back on the list when my daughter was a year old. And again, we waited for the profile to come through, and I think we took the second profile that came through. And then for him, in between there, we actually had frozen some embryos. And so we went back, and I remember my husband, and I sort of have some memory lapses on some of this. I don't know if I was just so stressed out, I didn't know what was going on. But so we had 2 frozen embryos. We did 2 transfers, and those both failed. And my husband, he said at the time, he was like, I don't even remember this. He said, you were so stressed out, keyed up, just like on a mission to make this thing happen. And, lo and behold, it didn't happen because obviously I wasn't potentially in the right frame of mind.
Well, can I just ask you a question to unpack some of your story, because there's an awful lot going on there.
Yeah.
So how old were you again when you were diagnosed with premature ovarian failure?
Yeah, so I was 28 when I was diagnosed with premature ovarian failure.
And what does that mean exactly? Does it mean that you weren't ovulating at all? Does it mean that you were fully in menopause? Is that what it means?
Essentially, yeah. It's basically, as I said, it's sort of the loss of function of ovaries before the age of 40.
Okay.
And they don't really call it menopause because it's not menopause, but essentially you get all the symptoms of menopause.
Okay. And how long were you and your husband trying? How long did it take, I guess, for you to get that diagnosis?
Because my periods were quite erratic, we went fairly, I was at 28, so maybe like a year or so, and we weren't really. Obviously, I knew something was wrong, so I kind of went sooner than later.
Okay. And then how old were you when you had your daughter?
Yeah, so I was 31 when I had Ava.
Oh, okay.
And then 34 when I had Will.
Okay. One of the things I wanted to ask you too was, how did you feel about using donor eggs? Was that, because that was, you said how old is your daughter now? She's
13.
13, yeah. So that was quite a while ago before it was more of a common occurrence. So how did you feel about using donor eggs and your partner as well? And what were the reactions from your friends and family? Were they supportive?
Yeah, there was actually different reactions, but I'm always a big believer in no secrets. I obviously wrote a book about this, so I don't believe in any secrets. I was very upfront with my kids to when all this was going down. So I talked to them. I think when they were 4 or 5 about this, they probably didn't really understand it, but I made sure to say it very early. This is kind of what happened. Mommy's egg, she had to, her eggs were no longer working, so she had to borrow from another lady, and so I've always been very open. Some people, were kind of like, oh, well, are you going to tell the children? And I kind of thought, it's got nothing to do with me. It's their history. Mm-hmm. And I have both the profiles for both children, as I say, back to the maternal and the paternal grandparents. And one is interested and the other one isn't. Mm-hmm. So one of my children wanted to read the profile, and they were good. The other one is just not ready. So but to say we've always been very open about it, and everyone, I've always told my friend's family, and obviously I've written a book about it. So anyone that's talking about it, I'm very open.
Okay. Well, I know before I interjected and started asking you questions, you were talking a little bit more about your son and how that worked, especially after the 2 failed attempts, because you said you had 2 frozen embryos from the first donor.
Yeah, so then we went back on the list for my son, and so then there was a waiting period for that again, where so my children are 3 years apart. So my son is almost 11 now, and my daughter will be 14 in a couple of months. So yeah, so I would have liked them closer together. So I was kind of in a panic there after those 2 frozen embryos didn't work, and I got back on the list, and to say we selected the second profile, and went ahead, and luckily it worked on the first live transfer for my son. It was a little touch and go in the beginning, so I was spotting. I was concerned there was going to be a miscarriage, but he hung on there, and it was funny because my husband's 5'8", so he's like a smaller stature, and then my daughter is taller than him, so it's funny how it kind of works out. But yeah, so that whole secondary infertility, I understand that side of things, and they changed the legislation in Canada where, like, he was born in 2004, so after that you weren't able to, because I was again paying for someone to go through their fertility treatment, and both of these donors had male factor infertility, and so they no longer allow that anymore. So I think they closed it down at the end of 2004, that program.
Just so that I'm understanding, so when you say both of the donors had male factor infertility, do you mean they couldn't conceive with their partners?
Yeah, so it wasn't the female that was having the fertility issue, it was her partner. So we were sponsoring, we were paying for
I see
for
what
them
you're
to go
saying.
through. Yeah, so they didn't have any issues with their eggs. That's why, like, most of them were getting 18 follicles or things like that. So there was quite a lot to split.
Okay. So what you were paying so you weren't just paying for her to go through the fertility treatment for you so that she could donate the egg to you. You were also paying for the fertility treatment for her to go through it herself.
Yeah, I paid for their whole thing.
Wow.
And for me. Yeah.
So
but mine wasn't as much because it was more of the fertility drugs to prime my body to prepare. And they no longer offer this.
Oh.
Yeah. Which is crazy. So yeah, we managed to. And at the time, I didn't know anyone that was experiencing donor eggs. I used to tell people, and they would look at me with like they didn't even know what I was saying.
Mm-hmm.
I still, to this day, when I say donor eggs, people, what? Obviously now I'm in the fertility community. People are know what I'm saying, but it is becoming more prevalent, donor eggs, which I think that's to do more with our with diet. But yeah.
Well, can I ask you a question? Because obviously IVF is expensive. How did you manage the additional financial stress to your family?
Yeah, I never even with the money. We just we were both working and successful careers, and so we just managed to make it happen and handled it ourselves.
Oh, okay.
So we were fortunate that way that we were able to pay for it, and it wasn't necessarily an obstacle. Like if there had been more and more and more, then that becomes an issue. But because we were successful, like both fresh, worked the both times, and then the frozen ones were not as expensive. So
okay, so you just kind of figured it out, which is what you do.
It's funny, yeah, and it wasn't even I was a woman on a mission, so that was obviously there's an obstacle there with finances, but we kind of we just made it happen.
Yeah. Well, and I just wanted to ask you about what your experience was with IVF. Like, how did you find that process? And even before like the testing that you go through and then the IVF itself, how did you find the process?
I think I almost looking back, I probably was in a daze. I didn't quite, because there wasn't as much support back then. I didn't know anyone that was going through this. All my friends were, getting pregnant with no issues at all. I had really no one to talk to. But I'm a very independent person, and I kind of I'm very action oriented. So I just was like, okay, here's what I need to do, and I just kept going forward, and I handled it. But looking back, I was stressed to the max. That's why, after I had Ava and I went back and it didn't work for those frozen embryos. I was so constricted and stressed out, and the clinic, I think they offered like maybe a little bit of. There wasn't any counseling, because I remember thinking, well, how am I going to tell my children? How am I going to, what's the, I know there's books written on this, there's, all sorts of support. But back then it wasn't, there wasn't the amount of support. And, so it was, I just remember obviously a lot of doctor's appointments, a lot of driving. It was like an hour car ride, like 2 hours in traffic, getting to appointments, and having to tell people, at work and stuff like that, because you're missing time, and things that are private that maybe you don't necessarily want to talk about right away, but having to share those things.
Yeah.
So that was difficult. Obviously, my husband was a huge support during all of this, and my friends and family too. But I think having someone that's been through it is extremely important. I run a support group now in the Burlington area, so it's crucial for people that are going through this to have someone to talk to.
I think that what you're saying makes it's really resonating, because you wouldn't really think about how far we've come in terms of the support that's available versus 13 years ago. So so you had mentioned that, at that time, when you're 28, 29, 30, going through all of these challenges, that of course the holistic part of things, and, that wasn't even on the radar, because as you said, you're a woman on a mission, understandably. And so when did you get inspired to pursue this route and actually learn more about holistic nutrition and integrative nutrition and everything?
Yeah, so it wasn't actually until I turned 40, which is funny. So basically I was in HR my whole career, and, climbing the HR corporate ladder. I didn't really think, I thought that's always in my career. I didn't really think I could even look at anything differently. It wasn't even, again, on my radar. And then I took a coaching course, actually, I was going to bring coaching into the corporate environment. And so I took a coaching course, and then when you take a coaching course, you actually go through your own personal coaching. And so after that course kind of I was, transformed, and decided I really liked the health and wellness side of things. So then after I took so I was a certified life coach after that coaching course. It's accredited with the International Coaches Federation. And then after that, I'm like, as I say, I like health and wellness. So then I decided to enroll in the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. So then that was a health coaching course. And that's when I sort of figured out all my health challenges, and this holistic side of things really opened up to me. And it's funny because my parents have been vegans for like 25 years. My mom's been talking. I grew up practically vegetarian. I left the house. They became vegans. So it's not like I wasn't exposed to this stuff. My mother was back. She was carrying, the little string bags back, and I was always so embarrassed that she was bringing these into the grocery store. And so I was around all this stuff, but I, continued to eat the standard Western diet, and there I suffered with, infertility. And then, fast forward years later, then I had chronic bladder infections. These yeast infections were just vicious that were going, and I just thought it was normal. I didn't really know that I had a yeast infection. And then chronic sinusitis and sinus infections. And then I was on all sorts of antibiotics, which again destroyed my gut flora. And then I became allergic to all sorts of antibiotics. I remember at one point I thought I had the dog had brought fleas into the house, and I was scratching like a crazy person, and no, I had hives from the antibiotics. So and basically then I figured out I had a intolerance to gluten, dairy, and corn. And really, when I took those things out of my diet, and also it sort of had churned up candida, and sort of my gut flora then was imbalanced, and And so once I removed those from my diet, then, over the course of a month or so, my sinusitis went away, the bladder infections, like I had like blood in the urine, like all this sort of stuff. It was brutal. I was running to the toilet all the time. Those went away. I also removed processed sugar as well. And and the same with the yeast infections, which, as I say, I didn't even know it was a yeast infection. I just thought that was normal.
Oh, so you kind of just had like a chronic low-grade yeast infection for a really long time?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah, it's I guess hindsight is always 2020. So it's really easy to look back and say like, oh, if I had done this or that. But I guess looking back now with the knowledge that you have, how do you feel looking back? Like, do you think to yourself like, oh, these factors contributed to it? Or do you kind of think, well, it could have happened even if I had a healthier diet? It's kind of like, how do you, when you look back to your premature ovarian failure, like, what do you think about it given your knowledge now?
Yeah, like I think I had this intolerance. I remember looking in the mirror when I was 12 and I had these huge circles under my eyes and always had to put cover up under my eyes. Well, that's like a prime signal of food allergies or intolerances. So it's always been there. And then it just got to the point where, the body couldn't take it anymore. And then it's, all these antibiotics and wipes out all the good bacteria in your system. And yeah, looking back, like I was successful when I had both my children and extremely fortunate. I think if I had known about food, I wouldn't have needed to go the IVF route. But I didn't know how food and lifestyle changes. So it's not just diet; it's also stress management and your sleep and all sorts of other things that I deal with in my coaching program. Yeah, if I had have known about those things, I don't think I would have needed to go that route. But it wasn't on my radar. I didn't know. You don't know what you don't know.
No, it's true. And I think that's one thing too that's really important especially when you're learning a bunch of information. So obviously, I do the podcast to expose listeners to different opinions, different health professionals, different ideas. But it's not to beat yourself up to say, oh, I should have, because there's no should have. The past is over.
That's right.
And so the only thing you can do is let this information inform what you can do today and moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what are some of the ways that you help clients who are struggling with infertility? And there's so many different reasons that cause infertility. So maybe you can just kind of use that question as a jumping board.
Yeah. So it kind of, because I marry both the emotional component with the life coaching with the food and diet, like the health coaching, it is kind of like two big subjects. So I kind of maybe talk a little bit about about life coaching first of all. And if people aren't familiar with coaching, I like kind of use this analogy. So coaching is kind of like a architect. So it's building a future, whereas therapy perhaps is like an archaeologist digging into the past. And although that's not always the case, so as a coach, I still may dig in the past a little bit, but we don't really hang out there. And obviously therapists can still, look towards the future, but typically it's more of, digging into their history. So that's kind of as far as coaching goes. But really, I guess there's some main points kind of with coaching. So there's limiting beliefs. So something that you accept about your life that limits you in a way. So for instance, maybe you believe you need to be skinny to get pregnant. And although obviously your BMI has, there is a factor there, getting pregnant, to be totally skinny and perfect size to get pregnant is just, that's not true. So I kind of have, when people are saying these limiting beliefs, sort of have the question, how true is that really? And, where did you get that idea from? And how has that belief affected you? And then how can you let that belief go? So sort of some questioning around these limiting beliefs, because people have them and they don't even know they have them. And, all of us do. And then there's interpretations. So this is an opinion or a judgment that you create about an event, situation, or person. So sometimes we get stuck on this belief. So example, we'll never have a baby and I'll be alone forever. So another way to ask them, so what's another way to look at that? And what would, someone else, maybe your spouse or your friend, have to say about that? And what would someone who had, the completely opposite point of view say about that? So just having them question, because I sort of say, 99% of the thoughts that you had yesterday, you're going to have the same 99% of thoughts again the next day. So it's to kind of take yourself off automatic pilot and raise awareness to your thoughts. And another one is kind of assumptions. So just because something happened in the past, will it happen again? So this is very important with infertility, obviously, because you've got the around the cycles every month, and then potentially miscarriage. So a lot of assumptions could be coming into play there in someone's mind. And that's sort of just because it happened before, why must it happen again? So just even asking those questions and bringing awareness to someone is huge. And another one, a big one, is the gremlin, or that inner critic, sort of the person that's sort of the little thing that sits on your shoulder and tells you all these horrible things about yourself.
Little mini jerk that sits on your shoulder.
Yeah. So we all have it, and it's self-doubt and I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm selfish, whatever it's saying to you. It's to then first step is to bring awareness to what this little thing is saying. And down the road you can name it, and there's a whole strategy of how to integrate it into your thoughts. But first is just to bring awareness to this little voice and realize that you are not the voice. You are the observer of the voice, which can be powerful for people. And then another one is kind of like what's pushing your buttons. And this is sort of like to say, you spot it, you got it, which can be a little harsh for some people because sometimes, what you're dealing with in yourself. So you become hyper aware in others. So for instance, someone who announces their pregnancy in front of you when you've told them you're dealing with infertility, you may feel they're being insensitive, unfeeling, and kind of selfish, that sort of things. So it just pushes your buttons. So it's, how can you, what might be your button in this situation? If it comes up again, how will you handle it? So sort of to bring awareness to, because some things people say, it just gets under our skin, and you find yourself just, like, catastrophizing and ruminating and just going crazy on this one thing that someone would have said, and there's a reason why it's like to bring awareness to why it's just getting under your skin, which is huge, because then it sort of leads to stress and things like that. So basically, a lot of this is kind of, we talk about like mind body activities, so like meditation and yoga, and like journaling is always part of my program, visualization, things like that. Alice Domar, sort of the author of Conquering Infertility, she's there's a study there where she talked about the mind body groups. So she had one. What was this one? So within 1 year, this is women were placed in 3 groups. So for mind body group. One had a mind body group, one met weekly as a support group, and the control group received no intervention. So within 1 year, 55% of the mind body group and 54% of the support group conceived pregnancies that resulted in a baby, compared to only 20% of the control group. So just talking about how important it is to not to keep these emotions and thoughts inside when you're going through infertility. It's really important to talk to someone about them. So I do run a infertility support group that's sponsored by IAC in the Burlington, Ontario area, and we kind of take some of the philosophies actually from Alice Dumar's book when we run the group. So that's kind of the life coaching component there.
Well, that example that you gave, it kind of leads perfectly into one of the questions that I wanted to ask, because a lot of the time, if you're trying to research infertility and you do a search, or you talk to somebody, or you listen to a podcast, or whatever the case is, there's always a focus on diet and exercise and weight, like you said, or whatever the case is, but it's usually physical aspects or things like that. Why is the emotional aspect so important?
Yeah, so that's sort of, as that study says, it's just really like sharing what the feelings and the emotions that you're going through, because it does affect conception. And really, that might sound kind of woo-woo to people, but it's proven through studies. So it's and for myself, when I was going through it, I didn't really talk to anyone. I didn't have support. And like a lot of people get into it. I was fortunate; it worked on both tries for me. But some people spend years of this, and they've kind of locked themselves away, and they haven't been able to, share their struggle with infertility. And I kind of say it like that. If you look through infertility, like the lens of infertility, it affects like every aspect of your life, like your career, your spirituality, your relationships. Yeah, if you look through the lens of infertility, it just affects everything, and it is like a big deal. And to not be able to share that, and it's also obviously to share it with a trusted person too.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I found what you said about all the different aspects of the different parts of the emotional side of it that you address, but especially managing your expectations, managing your own limiting beliefs, managing your negative thoughts, especially when you're working through this process, you're going through fertility treatments. Obviously, they don't always work, and it can take some time. And especially, I think it's natural for most women to think that it's going to work on the first try, because you have to be hopeful. Why wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
you have to go into it thinking it's going to work, or else why would you be doing it?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that the emotional impact of those things can't be understated. So I definitely think that having somebody there to actually help you move through those emotions and helping you not just rehash them. Like, I really like the distinction that you made between kind of therapy or just that thinking of looking back and rehashing the past versus actually trying to plan the future and trying to manage your thoughts and be mindful and learn how to not ruminate and not stress about I think that's easier said than done. I think, you're on your third round of IVF, and yet another woman walks into work and I'm pregnant. And I mean, that's going to be difficult no matter what, but at least having a strategy and having a conversation around those emotions.
Yeah, that's kind of like with meditation or journaling or breathing, and whatever works. There's some people think meditation like, ooh, that's just not for me. So it's like just to pick one thing out of those mind-body strategies and implement it.
Mm-hmm.
And yoga, fertility yoga, obviously, is a good one.
Yeah. Well, and you had mentioned as well the impact of stress on fertility. And obviously, maybe you could talk a little bit more about that, but how important it is to, like, yoga in of itself is a way to de-stress. So maybe you could talk about the impact of stress on fertility.
Yeah, obviously, stress has a huge impact on fertility. So it's, I think it's a lot again, the support system that you have around. So you can have your partner supporting you. You can have, obviously, a coach or a therapist, or a friend, but to really have someone that's there, and someone that's, obviously been through it is a better support system as well too, that can understand it. Because sometimes we talk about this compassion fatigue, that we could experience compassion fatigue. Like our friends are like, oh my goodness, this is every month, and they're with you, and you've maybe got one or two that really understand, they're helping you, and then they get compassion fatigue for you, and then you even get compassion fatigue for yourself. You're like, oh my goodness, I can't even show myself any compassion anymore, because it just keeps happening over and over again. So that's why to have someone else that can, lend a supportive ear. And a lot of the time, I'm talking a lot now, but really in my coaching sessions, it's obviously a lot of me asking questions, but it's a lot of me listening, because a lot of us don't actually experience someone that's actually actively listening to them without giving advice, asking them what they would do. It's their body. They understand their body better than anyone. Really, what's your intuition telling you? I sort of ask people, where do you feel that in your body? Like when you say, if we're having a negative thought perhaps, and then turning around to a positive thought, where do you feel that? Is it your stomach? Is it your chest? Is it your, is it stuck in your head? Like where is it? Some people are like, oh, I get that right away. Other people it takes a while. I know for me it took a while because being in the corporate environment, that kind of intuition was beaten out of me. I forgot what it was like. And now I'm like, oh, I can get quiet and actually listen to myself and that gut instinct, like to really, like, what you need to do, which is really powerful. And that helps with, feeling empowered helps with stress.
Mm-hmm. Well, and having that person there to be accountable and to really, I feel like in our busy lives, always running from one thing to the next, having to actually sit there with somebody who is focused on you and trying to help you figure out exactly what you need and what you want and how to strategize. There's a lot to be said for going through that process, because unless you have someone there kind of keeping you accountable, maybe you're less likely to try to do that stuff on your own.
Yeah, exactly. The accountability piece. I kind of say, I ask people, how do you want to be coached? Would you like to be, is it like passive, aggressive, sort of assertive in between? Because, because basically along the way you're going to slip up. You're going to tell me you're going to be doing these certain goals, and then something's going to get in the way. Life gets in the way, and it's not going to happen. So how do you want me to hold you accountable? Now, typically, I'm not going to be over there like yelling at you, but it's more like, okay, let's figure out exactly. You said you'd be exercising 3 or 4 times a week. Well, let's figure out why that didn't happen, and then we can kind of put a strategy in. And sometimes people set these unrealistic goals. Oh my goodness, I'm gonna, like, right now I'm eating burgers and hamburgers by burgers and hamburgers, that's the same thing. I'm eating burgers and fries. All next week I'm going to go right to, kale and quinoa and smoothies. I'm just going to change my diet overnight. And how realistic is that you're going to be able to totally do that change right away, where it's maybe better to say, you know what, I'm going to start out by having, a glass of water when I wake up, or having a salad before each meal. Sort of start out in like small steps to make changes. So then that makes you feel more successful, rather than setting this huge goal. And I'm all for setting huge goals. I do like that for, like, the future and stuff like that. But chunking it down, that's more manageable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always think to myself, if I want to make a change, I want to do something that I can actually integrate on a regular basis, as opposed to, I'm never going to eat ice cream again. That's not realistic.
No, you're going to fail.
Exactly. Well, we've talked a little bit, quite a bit about the emotional challenges that can impact fertility. Maybe we can shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the other ways that you help women who are struggling with infertility, and even how you help clients work towards identifying the underlying causes of their fertility challenges.
Yeah, sure. So I can kind of talk about the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. So this is sort of, you had mentioned in the intro there. So I studied over 100 dietary theories, and so it's taught by some leading health and wellness experts. So name a few of them here. So Dr. Andrew Weil, so the director of the Arizona Center of Integrative Medicine, he has an awesome breathing technique, which I like, which is the 4-7-8 breath technique. So you breathe in for 4, then you hold for 7, and then you go out for 8. So that's kind of a cool, and he has that on his, if you look up breath technique, that's on his site. So that's kind of a good mind-body tool that he has. Taught by also Deepak Chopra, which everybody, I think most people have heard of Deepak Chopra. They have the 21-day meditation challenge. We're recording this, I think, in July. So he is having a 21-day meditation, a free one on right now. It'll be finished I think on the 31st. So by the time this airs, it'll be done. But they do offer those free meditation challenges periodically, and they're amazing. So that's something to think of as well. And then also, I heard, and I've had the opportunity to actually hear these thought leaders speak in New York City as part of my training too. So Joe Cross, he's the documentary Sick, Fat, and Nearly Dead, sort of the guy that revolutionized the green juice, traveled across North America, and so I remember looking at the documentary and one of the comments was I had to pause the movie to run out and buy a juicer. So he has some awesome recipes for juice. And also Dr. Walter Willett, so he's the chair of nutrition at Harvard. So he is actually a co-author of the Fertility Diet, which is it's based on an 8-year Harvard study of over 18,000 nurses. So that's a must read for fertility, and I'll talk about some of the sort of the health stuff that came out of that study a little bit later. And then another one is Janine Ross, and she's a best-selling author and expert on emotional eating. So her book, another must-read, is Women, Food, and God, and it's on Audible as well too. And that's just, she said I've gained and lost over 400 pounds in her whole life, just over, and like she was anorexic, bulimia, all of these things, and just really figured out the emotional component of food, which is huge for people. Yeah, and then I guess with the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, the main thing there is kind of bio-individuality, so we're all different, and so what works for you is not necessarily going to work for me. So that cookie cutter approach, so all my programs are customized. And obviously, each person comes in with a different infertility diagnosis. So yeah, I kind of approach each person differently. So, and then combining that whole. This is an Institute for Integrative Nutrition word, but primary food. So like the spirituality, relationships, physical activity, and career, along with your healthy food, and kind of saying you're not going to achieve optimum health if you could be eating kale, quinoa, and every superfood out there, but if you've got a toxic relationship and a miserable career and you're not even exercising, you won't achieve optimum health. So it's just looking at the full spectrum of things. And I sort of talked before about a little bit about crowding out, which is instead of eliminating things for people, if they're trying to change their diet and lifestyle to if you want to quit your soda or your pop, to quit that, instead of having, before you have your Coke, have a glass of water. Maybe you won't need to drink as much. If you're trying to not eat the burger, instead of saying not eat the burger, before you have the burger, have the salad, and maybe you won't need to have as much of the burger or fries. And the same for caffeine and things like that, if you're trying to cut down on, to not go cold turkey on those sort of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, instead of focusing on, because when you say, I'm going to get rid of X, all you want is that.
Yep.
I'm not going to drink coffee. All you want is coffee. But if you...
That's what, the drink about it. You get rid of chocolate, you're like, all of a sudden you've got this crazy cravings for it. So, yeah, on the programs, I sort of talk a lot about cravings and what the body's trying to tell you when you're craving different foods. And, that's a huge thing for people. Because really, as you then start to eat a cleaner diet, the cravings disappear, which it sounds crazy to someone who's right in the middle of cravings. But I was the same. I had like major dessert cravings like crazy, and they've disappeared. Not to say I don't have dessert now. I have different things.
So what are some of the fundamental, I guess, healthy dietary recommendations when it comes to fertility? I mean, I would imagine, processed food isn't good, but for someone who you're coaching who's kind of eating a typical diet, what are some of the fundamental changes that you work towards with them?
Yeah, so these are kind of some from, like, a little bit from the Fertility Diet. So the book co-authored by Walter Willett. So some of them talked about avoiding trans fats, which there still are some trans fats in like 2.5% are still in margarine, 5% can still be in cookies and pastries and frozen desserts and puddings, things like that. So definitely to avoid those they're not good for fertility. To use more unsaturated vegetable oils. So you want to have more like walnut oil and flax oil and flax seeds, chia seeds, which are awesome to make a chia pudding. I have that in my cookbook, or throw it in your smoothie. Walnut oil or avocado oil I toss on salads. Pumpkin seeds, coconut oil. Do most of my cooking with that. You can also use it as a body moisturizer as well too. And then so turn more to vegetable protein. So that basically my cookbook I wrote with a professional chef from the National Gourmet, which is the top health inspired chef school in North America. The book has It's mostly plant-based, but it does have, chicken and turkey and fish. So that's kind of this is the whole thing. You don't need to go vegan, but really to increase. So I've got here a quote here from the study here. So women with the highest consumption of animal protein had a 41% greater risk of ovulatory infertility than women who consumed more plant protein. So to have more plants into your diet is something to look at. So you can look at legumes and nuts kind of as proteins as well. And then also to choose slow carbs, not no carbs. So like kind of the slowly digested carbs, so not the like the whole grains, vegetables, whole fruits, instead of the faster ones that kind of will interrupt your blood sugar and lead to insulin resistance, and that could potentially disrupt ovulation as well. This is really important for women that have PCOS. So many women with PCOS have insulin resistance, and 50% of women with PCOS have diabetes or pre-diabetes before the age of 40. So that's something to consider. So to give up those simple carbs, or to look at other alternatives. In the fertility diet, they talk about to have. They say here that skim milk appears to promote infertility. So they're saying actually, if you drink milk, you should choose whole milk. I talk about that actually. So there's like 75% of people potentially could have a dairy intolerance. So it's to really look to see if you have an intolerance first, and then if you don't, then bring it back in the form of maybe organic, full fat dairy, if that's something that you want to have. But the non-dairy options such as coconut milk, hemp milk, rice milk, almond milk. It's definitely a lot easier out there now to find those alternatives. Finding a lot of almond milk available even at when you go out to restaurants. And then also taking a multivitamin is obviously helpful. Folic acid, a probiotic. So eating, you can take the probiotic or consume more fermented foods. And also getting plenty of iron from some plants. So researchers have found that women who take iron supplements have an average of 40% less risk of ovulatory infertility. So they're than those who don't take iron supplements. So that's something to look at. And also to keep hydrated. So obviously water is the best tool here. And then some people to kind of look at their caffeine intake. So even just 1 cup of caffeine can adversely affect fertility, and 2 or more soft drinks impact fertility. That's from the Nurses' Health Study by Walter Willett, and co-authored by Walter Willett. And then another one is to actually consider the weight. So weighing too much or too little can interrupt normal menstrual cycles and throw off ovulation. So the best range for fertility is to have your body mass index or your BMI between 20 to 24. And even, some people even to reduce it by 5 to 10%. If you have your weight, even if that much of a weight loss can impact fertility. So really, someone, 200 pounds, so it's not, although, that sounds maybe a lot, but even that, 5 to 10% weight loss can definitely help someone. And then there's activity zone. So really to get as much activity as possible, and you want to kind of, there's a fine line between sort of moderate physical exercise, right? If someone is doing vigorous exercise, that's not good for fertility. And if someone who's just sitting on the couch, that's not good for fertility either. So it's you sort of walk and do some exercise, but if it's considered vigorous and it's like crazy cardio and things like that, that's not the best for fertility. Really the best diet tip for your overall health, it can sound maybe a little crazy, but eat more fermented foods. So it's really good for your gut flora, your microbiome. So to eat more sauerkraut, kimchi, pickles, kefir. You can make your own coconut kefir. So fermented foods. So basically, it's sold in the refrigerated section of your grocery store, and they're unpasteurized, and they're just full of really good really good bacteria for your gut.
Well, I think all of those things are really good ideas. I know that on the podcast, I've interviewed different guests who talk a lot about eating real food and kind of trying to go for things that will eventually rot, as opposed to things that never go bad. Kind of a good guideline. And I love focusing on food that is nutrient dense. And I love the idea of obviously in the world that we live in, supplementation is often necessary. But one of the things that I love to focus on is trying to get nutrients whenever possible from food, just because it's not always is a supplement as effective as getting it from the source. So I think kind of the overall message that I'm hearing is, eat real food, eat lots of vegetables. And I know some of the guests that I've had on the show have talked about there's obviously still some debate when it comes to red meat, but for people who do eat red meat, looking for the local grass-fed, hormone-free options, because especially we talk so much about menstrual cycle health on the show, and when you're eating conventional meat that's laced with hormones, that can have an impact on your menstrual cycle and have an impact on your fertility because it's disrupting the natural hormone cycle in your body. So there's so many things to consider. And then what it seems to always come back to is real food, stuff that rots, as close to natural food as possible.
Yeah, what Michael Pollan or Bill Pollan says, about don't eat it if your great grandmother doesn't recognize it, and shop on the outside of the grocery store, and if you can't pronounce it, then you don't want to have it. And if it's got a health claim, definitely don't eat it.
Yeah, if it has a commercial, it's probably not food. And so one of the questions I want to ask you as we kind of wind down for the night, what change do you find to be the hardest for your clients to make?
I guess it's different for every person, right? So depending on their infertility diagnosis, we could potentially recommend they need to go gluten-free, or they need to go processed sugar-free, or perhaps dairy-free. So in the beginning, potentially there could be an elimination diet. So that can be difficult for people as they kind of, if they're used to eating a standard Western diet and then they, radically change, that can be difficult. But the thing is, as you move through that, on day 3 or 4, you start to feel so much better that although it's difficult, and it takes, any kind of change, it takes time, it's kind of the most rewarding thing, the most empowering, because there's definitely are diet and lifestyle things that you can do that will, dramatically impact conception. And especially with unexplained infertility, the first place to start is diet, number one. I'm looking at going, gluten-free, dairy-free, processed sugar-free at the minimum for a minimum of 3 months. It takes, the life cycle of the egg is 90 days, and sperm is 70 to 80. So minimum to clean the body out. And but as I say, those changes, it's difficult, but things that are difficult sometimes are more rewarding.
Well, my understanding is that often it's recommended to try that elimination diet with gluten and dairy-free because they're two of the top allergens. So if you have a food sensitivity, those are kind of the big names as far as food sensitivities go. And so I've cut out gluten over the last little while based on a recommendation from my naturopathic doctor because I have hypothyroid and
definitely, gluten is poison for that. Yep.
Yes, but one of the things I can say, because I can understand why that would be challenging, is because when you actually try to cut out something like gluten or wheat in general, you really realize that wheat is in everything. It is the basis for our entire diet. And so as soon as you try to cut it out, you realize you go to a restaurant and 90% of the items are wheat. And you go to the grocery store and you realize that, it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. So I could totally understand why that would be a challenge. But at the
Yeah.
same time, if you, like you had talked about earlier, the crowding out, so instead of focusing on I can't eat bread, focusing on what you can eat and
Mhm.
organizing your meals according to all, because there's a lot of options. There's tons of vegetables in the world. There's so many different types of meat if you eat meat. And so there's a lot of things that you can do instead of feeling limited by it.
Exactly, and that's kind of why I wrote the cookbook, because there's amazing food out there that it's absolutely delicious, and it just makes your body feel so good. As far as some of that, the standard Western diet, we don't realize how it's impacting our health, and infertility is on the rise. 1 in 6 Canadians experience infertility, and our standard Western diet is to blame for that rise. Is my take on that. And so whatever you can do, what you put on your fork every day does impact your health. And some people want to go off and take supplements and do other things, but like, what do you put on your body every day? The main fuel is food. So to me, that's a kind of a no-brainer to look at. And also sort of just talk a little bit about Randine Lewis and her book, The Infertility Cure, talks about people that she treats. So she's you've had her on your show, I think, haven't you?
Not yet, no.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I thought you had. Yeah. So people that she treats, she sends to a clinic. There's a 60% success rate with IVF. She does diet and lifestyle changes similar to what I do with my fertility program. And then she also has acupuncture and herbs. And then people that she sends there have a 90% success rate. So to me, looking at your diet and lifestyle, it's just a no-brainer, because it will definitely improve the success rate of any kind of ART that you're going through.
Well, I mean, a healthy body is the foundation of healthy fertility, and so there's a connection there.
That's right. That's
right. So that's wonderful. I hope to have her on the show one day. And so I have a few final questions to end the show.
Sure.
So what would you say is one of the biggest myths about fertility that you'd like to see corrected?
I guess the biggest myth about fertility would be, the fact that I don't think many people realize how diet and lifestyle can be a factor. I'm not sure if that would be a myth, but I guess the myth is they just don't realize that the impact it's having on their fertility, from PCOS to hypothyroidism to unexplained infertility to endometriosis to all of these infertility diagnoses can be impacted with food. So the myth would be they don't know.
Yeah, I agree with you, because I think the myth is that these things happen in a vacuum and you're just unlucky. And I think that view cripples our ability to change it. I think that just like when you discovered, the holistic aspect of life, similarly to myself, because I didn't always have the knowledge of how food can impact your fertility and your health. So you just think these things just happen. Like, for example, my family, there's a history of fibroids in my family.
Okay.
So you just think it happens. You just think that you're unlucky or it's genetic, not realizing that the food you're eating, especially exposure to estrogenic hormones or xenoestrogens, all those different types of things, are contributing to the problem. And you can actually make a significant impact on your own health just by making certain changes of diet. So I absolutely think that that's a myth.
Yeah, like I think we all have these genetic weaknesses that are either turned on or off by food.
Exactly.
And yeah.
But we're kind of taught that the genetic component is like a we're kind of taught that the genetics determine it, and so that makes you feel like there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, that that you're destined to be obese, you're going to have diabetes, you'll have heart disease, and you'll die of cancer. And it's either turned on or off by food.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which can sound crazy to some people, but it's extremely empowering to think of it that way.
Yeah. Well, and food is a factor, as well as stress, as well as sleep. Sleep is an
That's
important
right.
factor, and exercise, and even just, and you just don't think that it makes a difference. So, and last question of the day. Given your own experience with infertility struggles, is there any one thing that you wish every couple knew about fertility and conception even before they were thinking about having children and starting a family?
Yeah, I think, not to harp on it, but to go back to the diet and lifestyle to really say, okay, take these, however, like the minimum, like my programs are 6 months, but take a minimum of 3 months to clean out your body from any kind of toxins that may be in there, and prepare it for to be ready for a baby. And it really, just to really practice self-care and self-love and stress techniques, stress relieving techniques, and just be kind to yourself. That little critic on your shoulder that's beating you up, just actually, show yourself some compassion and some love.
Mm-hmm. I think those are fantastic words to end on today. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for being here today. It was really nice chatting with you, and I love that we spoke about life coaching and fertility coaching, because I think that can be a really powerful tool to add when you're struggling with infertility, to have that support and that ability to address the emotional components of it, because that can't be understated how deeply that can impact you and how much additional stress it can cause you if you don't have that support. And even just to help somebody have somebody help you unpack all the feelings and everything that you're experiencing during that time.
Great, I appreciate the opportunity, and I just actually wanted to offer for your readers, for your listeners, to they can download a free chapter of my book at www.fabfertile.com, and that'll hit you. Actually, you have to do / landing page down another / download your free chapter, and maybe. I'm not sure if you can have the link in the show notes, but so they can download a free chapter. And then so I offer a 30-minute free consultation. So anyone that books before September the 4th, a free consultation with me, will receive a free copy of my cookbook. So.
Okay. Well, that link will be on the website. So the link to today's podcast is fertilityfriday.com/40. So the number 40. And I'll link to the program. Thank you so much for offering that to our audience members. I'm sure that many of the listeners will want to get in on the free chapter to see the work that you've done, and also take advantage of the free 30-minute consultation. So thank you for being so generous with that.
Hey, thank you.
And did you want to shout out your webpage, and just to make sure the listeners know where to go to find you and if they want to work with you?
Yeah, so it's Fabulously Fertile. So my webpage is www.fabfertile.com.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks again, Sarah. It was so nice chatting with you tonight.
Great. Thanks a lot, Lisa. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You can always find me on Twitter at Fertile Friday, or on Facebook at facebook.com/fertilityfridays with an S. And you can also stop by the blog and leave a comment in the show notes page, which you'll find at fertilityfriday.com/40. So Sarah did offer, for a limited time, a free download of a chapter of her book, Fabulously Fertile, as well as a free 30-minute consultation with her. And so head over to fertilityfriday.com/40 for the links to those fantastic offers from Sarah. So thanks again, Sarah. It was great talking to her and great having her on the show. And I really am just grateful that she was able to share her story, and I hope that you got a lot out of it. So thanks again for listening. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.